And the more Gnosticism, the more excited they become. So let's bring in the Gospel of Thomas. Let's bring in the Gospel of Mary.
There's a lot of people going astray on this. Even the elect may be deceived.
The Apocrypha of the New Testament attempts to supply the silence of the Scripture in reference to the early life of Christ by giving a fancy sketch of his childhood years. So can we trust them?
No.
They relate fictitious tales. Does the spirit of prophecy approve of the Apocrypha?
No.
Fictitious drivel. That's what they are. We should have nothing to do with apocryphal books except to condemn them.
Ellen White mentions in Youth Instructor in the 1870s that she was using a volume extra outside her Bible of New Testament Apocrypha. So she goes ahead and mentions the infancy gospel of Thomas, not by name, but by story, and basically mocks it, talks about these tales as fictitious tales. They're like novels. They're trying to fill in the silence of Scripture. But of course, that intrigued me. She's reading New Testament Apocrypha. Like, no one had mentioned this in any of, like, it's always brought up when people are like, stay away from the Apocrypha because they don't know there's a distinction between apocryphal gospels in the New Testament versus the Old Testament Apocrypha that was in the King James Bible. But no one really in the academic literature has talked about it. Like, she was reading them. Why? How'd she get that copy of the New Testament Apocrypha? Why is she curious about the infancy gospels? What is driving that curiosity? So that got me interested. If someone's reading this stuff, is it possible there's any quotations, and are there parallels? And lo and behold, there are. In the Acts of Paul and Thecla, in the Gospel of Nicodemus, there are a number of parallels. But before everyone freaks out and goes, oh my goodness, because in Youth Instructor, she criticized it. She criticized the infancy gospel of Thomas, said they're fictitious tales, blah, blah, blah. But she is drawing from it. So, is she contradicting herself? Is she not there? No. She, for instance, one of the arguments that I'm polishing in the Acts of Paul and Thecla, she draws certain descriptions, it looks like, of Iconium, the city that's at the center of that story, from the Acts of Paul and Thecla. But there are no references to Thecla. There are no references to the story. And what I could notice is, for example, in the Gospel of Nicodemus, it mentions that there was this secret meeting in addition to what the Bible stories say about Jesus that she mentions and alludes to. But that's it. Nothing about the contents of the meeting, nothing about the descriptions. And so what I started to piece together here is a theory that it looks like when she's using the New Testament Apocrypha, she is definitively not treating it like she treated Second Esdra and the rest of the Apocrypha in her Bible. She's treating it like historical documents, things that she can pick and choose historical facts from to fill in details about the whereabouts or geography or even the spirit of the people that were known at that city, but not the content itself. It's not valued. She's not sticking to it. She's changing things. She's going in different directions. And so what that seems to confirm is that she's not beholden to these documents. She is using them almost like a critical scholar uses the Apocrypha today in terms of, well, what can I get as background information from these stories? What might the indications be? And then she's just using this material, but discretionary wise. She doesn't just indiscriminately use it. She seems to pick and choose, very hard to figure out a reason or pattern, but something sticks out about this detail, and she chooses that to include about the history or the people. And I think that indicates something. One, that she makes a distinction in her mind between apocryphal works that are outside of her Bible, and she makes a distinction in terms of how she views the Apocrypha in her Bible in relationship to Scripture, but also that she is consciously making these choices outside of the Bible on what she uses. She's not indiscriminately, in my opinion, just grabbing stuff and going, oh yeah, this is what I'm dependent on. She has her own vision and she uses these materials to fill it out. So I think that it's intriguing, but the ramifications of it is, one, inspiration-wise, that maybe gives us a bit of a sigh of relief potentially if my observations are right. Okay, Ellen White is not just wide open, all materials that are out there. She's making distinctions. But two, it is helpful in the sense of Ellen White is kind of like an early critical scholar, which is something people don't usually get to talk about. She's observing historical apocryphal materials and making use of them in her own way for what she thinks of as reconstructing history and discussing things. I found on the Loma Linda archives of all the volumes that were in the Ellen G. White library in her personal and office. And there is one copy of the New Testament Apocrypha that is there. And it is in the office collection. Now it has a book plate. And so according to the document that Ron and others put together, the book plates are iffy in regards to time, because there are some books they know that were donated even during the lifetime of Ellen White that no one looked at. And it's not part of those collections. There's also the book plates, which some of them come from later after her death and others come from before. Now, the thing is, I think we can really realistically argue that that copy is Ellen White's from her lifetime, because she was the only one we know of that had an interest in the Ellen White office in the New Testament Apocrypha, had read, had been interacting with it. And there's no record of anyone else afterwards having an interest. In fact, it's historically unlikely anyone should have an interest in it afterwards. So that would seem to put the weight on it being more likely Ellen White's copy. But here's the fun part. That copy of the New Testament Apocrypha was printed between 1881 to 1883. But her comments in Youth Instructor are 1870s, which means she had a different copy of the New Testament Apocrypha. And this is a second copy she's replaced it with. So she has a long history of utilizing this over time. And that becomes a wonderful precedent for Adventists who are also engaged in this kind of work, to be able to say that, it's part of Adventist tradition, even with apocryphal gospels, how to pay attention to materials in them and find use for them in some way that does not make them canon, but still has historical value. So I think that to continue on Denny's point, the work that's coming, that stuff, I'm hoping that drives and helps drive more in-depth discussion on how this can affect views of inspiration and so forth.
Boy, this is mind-blowing and fascinating.
Yeah.
And oh my goodness, Matthew, that's just mind-blowing and incredible.
I just want to give a quick shout out over to Adventist Today and thank them for being the sponsors of this video.